Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, September 15th, 2017. And if you are a self-employed American like I am, this is one of those deadline days when you have to mail a check to the Infernal Revenue Service. I'll be mailing my contribution later today. Our lead story today on the News and Comment podcast, and as usual here on Friday, we are feeding live on Facebook video, and we already have a couple of people who are watching: Carl Howard, Rich Robinson, Stephen Hines. I invite each of you to share this video link with your networks on Facebook so that we can expand the audience. And my lead story is about Harvard University submitting to the Demagogues from the CIA. Now, they had extended an invitation to Chelsea Manning to speak at the Kennedy School of Government. And they named Chelsea Manning a visiting fellow, which in Harvard language doesn't mean a lot. I think you get a campus pass for the day. It means that you've been invited to spend more than a couple of hours on campus. And just to put this in context, Corey Lewandowski, Trump's campaign manager, a dubious contributor to CNN, he's been invited and designated a visiting fellow. And so has Sean Spice Boy Spicer, the guy who lied for a living, even when Donald Trump, wrote out the script and told him to go to the podium on the day after the inauguration and make the false claim that his crowd was bigger or as big as Obama's. So the standards for Harvard are questionable. But yesterday, Mike Morrell, who was a top dog at the CIA, he was acting director for a while. He was a key endorser of Hillary Clinton, expected to become CIA chief if Hillary had been elected. He wrote a letter saying that he was resigning from a different department at Harvard in protest of this invitation. And late yesterday, the current boss of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, he bolted. He bailed out of a scheduled talk at the Kennedy School at the last minute, embarrassing the dean of the school, Douglas Elmendorf, who then withdrew the invitation for her to serve as a visiting fellow and the perceived honor that it implies to some people, while maintaining the invitation for her to spend a day at the Kennedy School and speak in the school's forum. Now, he's trying to split the baby here. He's trying to appease the CIA, wants to keep the spooks happy, wants to keep access to them for Harvard and its government school and its fellows. But they're also trying to maintain the connection to Chelsea Manning and permit her to speak on campus. Chelsea tweeted that she was honored to be disinvited. And, of course, Mike Pompeo said that inviting Manning is a shameful stamp of approval. And he has stated, which is not supported by the record in her court-martial, he has stated that her disclosures to WikiLeaks harmed CIA agents. That is not proven. If it is the case, it has not been explored or introduced into some sort of evidence publicly. Adding to the demagoguery, Pompeo said, Manning stands against everything the brave men and women I serve alongside stand for. And Kevin Gosztola, the talented young journalist who writes at his own website, shadowproof.com, I highly recommend his work. He talks back to Pompeo thusly. He says, well, maybe there's some truth to the fact that Manning stands against everything that the brave men and women I serve alongside stand for. And Gosztola says she probably stands against the torture of prisoners in order to obtain intelligence or false confessions. She probably stands against deploying covert agents to countries to determine their sovereignty and impose the agenda of the United States on governments. She probably doesn't support the cult of intelligence's regular engagement in secrecy and deception to avoid responsibility for crimes. And let me point out that Kevin Gostola did excellent work in his daily coverage of the Chelsea Manning court-martial at Fort Meade, 5 or 6 years ago. And in Washington next weekend, a group of anti-war and environmental activists who are holding the No War 2017 War and Environment Conference will be honoring Chelsea Manning. She will be their special guest on September 22nd. While we're talking about the CIA, Mike Pompeo is demanding expanded powers to carry out covert drone strikes in Afghanistan. And this is one of those issues that Obama failed to properly resolve while he was still in the White House. Barack Obama wrestled with how the secret drone program should be conducted, whether the CIA should be conducting these signature strikes, or whether the Pentagon should be the primary user of these unmanned aerial drones. And because he really didn't resolve it, he gave a speech a couple of years ago where he said he essentially believed that the CIA should be gathering intelligence and not performing paramilitary functions. And he set up new procedures that were never fully implemented to essentially shift the responsibility for drones exclusively to the Pentagon. And I think that this now has created an opening where Mike Pompeo is trying to expand his portfolio and his authority. And this could create problems where the CIA, which typically does not reveal that it's conducted a drone strike, may hit a target, say in Afghanistan, and blowback will occur if you hit a wedding or, you kill civilians. And this could be blamed on the U.S. military instead of the CIA. That's just one possible complication. Yesterday, the White House quietly recertified that Iran is in compliance with the six-nation agreement regarding its nuclear intentions that was one of the signature foreign policy achievements of John Kerry and the Obama administration. Thursday's deadline is a significant one because the president had to agree that Iran is in compliance, and he's been bluffing or threatening for months now to create a pretext for the United States to back out of this deal. He acts as if it's just a two-party deal and that it would somehow just dissolve if the U.S. bails. I don't think that's the case, and it's an untested concept. But apparently, wiser heads have prevailed on the president. We assume that is General McMaster, the chief of the National Security Council, and perhaps General Mattis. But I consider this to be good news. Nevertheless, Trump continues to threaten to take action, and he's now kicking the can down a month. He says, "You will see what we'll be doing in October. It will be very evident," whatever that means. Today, as you may know, there was a bomb blast at a tube station in London. Some people were injured. I don't believe there have been any fatalities reported. But Trump jumped on Twitter, and he immediately assumed that it's a terrorist event. His tweet, "Another attack in London by a loser terrorist." Now, so far, that is not established. It's being investigated as an act of terrorism. The tweet continues, "These are sick and demented people who were in the sights of Scotland Yard." Now, how does he know that? Certainly, U.S. has a lot of intelligence. We spy on our allies. It's possible that he got a report that Scotland Yard did have a line on this possible incident. But the British, in their dry and reserved way, responded in the voice of Prime Minister Theresa May. She described this as unhelpful. I never think it's helpful for anybody to speculate on what is an ongoing investigation. And you'll notice that Trump will insert himself where he believes that Muslims are the people who caused it, the provocateurs. But when Muslim mosques in the United States are subject to attacks, his Twitter feed is silent. And there are many other examples of that. Here's another, wayward tweet from the Donald. Loser terrorists must be dealt with in a much tougher manner. The Internet is their main recruitment tool, which we must cut off and use better. So what does that mean? Is there going to be some crackdown on our ability to communicate in the name of fighting terrorists? Well, I guess we will have to wait and see. My phone lines are open if you'd like to comment on the news stories that I'm covering today. And at the bottom of the hour, I'm going to open it up wide to discussion of any topic. My top topic today is your reaction to Hillary Clinton's new book and the comments that she's made on her book tour. So I invite you to call now or later in the program. And the number to use is on your screen right now, 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. And you don't have to agree with your humble host to call the program. In fact, I always prefer to talk to people who don't share everything that I have to say. It makes it more interesting, and sometimes I actually learn from your comments, and I'm open to that. So if you want to check in today, I'd like to hear from you. The number again is 415-455-0102. So Salon Magazine is jumping on to the corporate media bandwagon, promoting the Trump-Russia narrative, and fundamentally the claim, which remains evidence-free, that it was Russian agents or actors who hacked into the DNC servers and then gave that information to WikiLeaks. And as you know, I remain a skeptic of this entire arc, and I am waiting for anonymous sources to come out of the shadows and put their names to the testimony that they have offered, and I'm waiting for any actual proof to come from our intelligence communities. And here is another sorry article with a really bad headline. Let's see if I can get that close enough to the camera for you to read. This is at Salon, which used to be a left-leaning, very progressive, independent media outlet. And this headline reads, "There's overwhelming evidence that Russia hacked Democrats, but the government hasn't shared it." And reporter Matthew Sheffield goes to great lengths to offer my point of view, which is the government's refusal to declassify relevant data or even to reference credible private sector research, making the case for Russian connections to the hacking, has greatly harmed public trust. Sheffield notes that the two intelligence reports, one in October, one in January, neither contained any actual evidence specifically proving that Russian-affiliated hackers had stolen data from computers controlled by the Democratic National Committee. Later in his report here, he says that the January report was actually reprinted from a 2012 government report discussing Russian state-owned media outlets. Neither intelligence report mentioned that one of the groups that targeted Democrats had been documented as writing its malware during working hours in the Moscow time zone. As if that proves anything. I mean, that is very weak circumstantial evidence. And he goes on to decry the vacuum created by the lack of formally declassified evidence. And what you come away with if you read this whole article is one bit of news. He says one of the most persistent myths of the larger story is that the DNC didn't fully cooperate with law enforcement officials trying to investigate the intrusion. And they say, they quote Democratic Party spokeswoman Adrienne Watson, that the claim is completely false. Then they go on to offer evidence that shows that it may be partly true, but not completely. Here's the rub, all right? What they're now saying is that the DNC coordinated with the FBI, provided everything it requested, including complete digital copies of DNC servers. Now, getting a digital copy is not the same as examining the original server. And you may argue that, the data is all the same, the reports of entry or downloading of data and documents would be the same. But this is a fundamental issue that remains true. The FBI has never directly examined the DNC server. They've relied on CrowdStrike, third parties, and what apparently were complete copies of the servers. And so this story does not live up to its headline. It is part of the telenovela, the soap opera, that has been spun based on circumstantial evidence, anonymous leaks, and evidence that is outside of public view. And in the comments section here at Salon, here's a foot soldier for Rachel Maddow. Keep up with the real news. Maybe try watching Rachel Maddow on MSNBC to see where the Russian investigation is and where it's going. Multiple congressmen on investigative committees are interviewed each week, along with investigative journalists. This is the real news and not the pap you see on Facebook or your local Fox News channel. Well, Marnie Norden wrote that comment. And Marnie, let me ask you, have you seen anyone interviewed or featured or referenced on Rachel Maddow's show who does not agree with the fundamental claim that it was Russia that hacked the DNC and that it was not likely an insider leak? The answer to that is, unfortunately, no. Rachel Maddow is practicing movement media, not journalism. She doesn't allow people who are critical of her narrative or the evidence that she has been using to come on her show and even discuss it in a friendly way. It is completely one-sided. And I hope that you have the critical skills to see that. Every day I pause here on the Peter B. Collins podcast and thank the people who support my work with your subscriptions and contributions. And I went to my post office box the other night and found a stack of mail with some nice checks in it. I want to thank Billy Cook in Eureka, Paul Elsesser in Lincoln, California, Del Leonard, who lives on the coast of Maine, Alex Marin in Surprise, Arizona, and Clifford Johnson, who, I think is in Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. But I thank each and every one of you for your generous support of the podcast. Some of you have contributed to help buy the new technical equipment. We're planning to install that next week and upgrade our systems here. But I do rely on the kindness of strangers to support this podcast, and I appreciate all of you who do so. If you'd like to join in, come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button and pull it down. Click on Become a Subscriber, and that takes you to the sign-up page. And if you grab a new $50 annual subscription and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S., I've got a bonus book for you, including Thomas Frank's latest important book about the Democratic Party called Listen Liberal. I'd be happy to pass that along to you if you sign up for a new subscription. Also, my phone lines are open. I'd like to hear from you at 415-455-0102. The reason I do the Facebook Live feed is to facilitate interaction with listeners. The biggest thing I miss in the shift from talk radio to podcasting is that the recorded podcast doesn't allow you to call in and share your views. So I seized on this Facebook platform. We're here on Friday afternoons trying to build a consistent presence here, and all I'm missing is your phone call. So get on the line right now at 415-455-0102. Today I'm releasing an important new in-depth interview to my subscribers. It is the first post-prison conversation that I've had with Don Siegelman, the former Democratic governor of Alabama. And in the interview, you'll hear him recap the way he was railroaded into federal prison by a conspiracy group of Republicans. And many of those people, topped by Jeff Sessions, the current Attorney General, Luther Strange, who was appointed by the corrupt Governor Bentley to replace Jeff Sessions until the election can be held to name his successor, and that may be the Bible-thumping Supreme Court Chief Justice Roy Moore. Alabama is a corrupt state. It is captive to a Republican machine. And the same people who railroaded Don Siegelman into prison are still in charge today. And in this excerpt from the in-depth interview with Don Siegelman, you'll hear him comment on the news that surfaced yesterday that Jeff Sessions, from Alabama, currently serving as the Attorney General, was brushed back, humiliated, yelled at, insulted, and asked to resign by Donald Trump back in May after Trump learned about Sessions' recusal from the Trump-Russia investigation. And so I asked Don Siegelman if he took any inner pleasure from watching Donald Trump make Jeff Sessions squirm and dance or perform like a marionette. And here's what Siegelman had to say.
What concerned me about President Trump's attack on Jeff Sessions was the possibility that people who don't like Trump would suddenly think, well, Jeff Sessions is a victim here, you know. And the truth of it is, I mean, Jeff Sessions, is a very conservative, right-wing Republican. Sometimes I wonder if he's, should even be called a Republican, but that was his party of choice. But keep in mind, Jeff Sessions endorsed Donald Trump before the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke, endorsed him. So I mean, he was way ahead of the game. And the other thing to keep in mind about Jeff Sessions is that during his confirmation hearings in 1986, when President Reagan had nominated him for a U.S. district judgeship, it was Ted Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, who brought out the fact that and questioned Jeff Sessions on his statement, to wit, Sessions said, quote, "I used to think the Ku Klux Klan was a pretty good group of guys until I learned they smoked pot." Well, after Sessions' nomination for the bench went up in smoke, pun intended, that's when he decided to enter state politics, and he ran for Attorney General and then for the U.S. Senate.
Don Siegelman, the former Democratic governor of Alabama. There's a powerful new documentary out about the Siegelman case, and it really captures it in excellent, correct detail. It's called Atticus versus the Architect. Atticus, a reference to Siegelman, and the Architect, a reference to Karl Rove. And it's in limited distribution. I know it's been screened in Alabama and in Atlanta, but do look for it at an art theater or an alternative movie house. It's an important explanation of what went on here, and I think they did a very good job of capturing a complicated case in an accurate way. Well, yesterday, despite massive police presence, the expenditure of $600,000 by the campus police and the city of Berkeley's police department, there was no riot when right-wing speaker Ben Shapiro came to the campus and was permitted to speak. By all reports, he was not heckled. There was no violence. I think 8 people were arrested on a preventive basis for having sticks or other potential weapons. But this is how it should be. I support the First Amendment right of odious people, from Ben Shapiro to Ann Coulter to Milo Yiannopoulos to Steve Bannon, to speak anywhere in the United States. Now, it does offend me that they intentionally choose Berkeley to provoke a scene, hoping that Antifa will come out, the black bloc hooded guys, and create a confrontation that turns these right-wing nuts into martyrs. So last night we saw the proper display of First Amendment rights, protections for people who wish to peacefully protest, and an absence of the violence that we've seen. And Stephen Hines posted on Facebook here, "Fascists at Berkeley for free speech, AM right-wing talk radio for the magic of the marketplace. Any parallels?" Well, I don't know if there are a lot of parallels, Stephen, but AM talk radio is now entirely captive to the right wing. There are almost zero liberal voices, even on some locally operated AM talk stations in the country today. And the right-wing hosts lie with impunity. They shamelessly promote Trump's lies and they defend him from some of the indefensible things that he does. And the companies that own them operate like pornographers. They don't care what the content is or what kind of harm it might do. That's the way they know how to make money, and that's how they will continue to do it. We know that North Korea launched another missile. This one made it over Japan and splashed into the sea. And what I find fascinating, this account from the New York Times, neither the United States nor Japan tried to shoot down the missile, perhaps because it was clear moments after the launch that it was not aimed at land. I actually think the reason we don't try to shoot down these missiles is that we know that our interception systems, our missile defense, the THAAD and the Patriots, they don't work. And the longer we can maintain the fiction that U.S. missile defense is a threat to these provocative acts by North Korea, well, we're only delaying that day of reckoning when I think the truth will come out. Also, the Trump administration chose not to take out the missile on the launching pad, even though they saw it being fueled up a day in advance. Now, I commend the president for his restraint. A unilateral or a first strike on North Korea will provoke support for North Korea by China. And that is the last thing that we need in this current context. And while I know a lot of people are fearful about particularly the coverage of this threat from North Korea, keep in mind that it really is not a direct threat to the U.S. Perhaps they could strike Guam. Perhaps they could get a missile to Hawaii. But the idea that we're going to prevent them by invading and attacking and leading to a confrontation along the 38th parallel is sheer madness. A friend of the Peter B. Collins podcast is Ian Berman. He's a longtime listener and subscriber, very active on our Facebook page. And he wrote a very important piece that I want to share with you today, based on a news account in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. And he exposes a recent meeting of a right-wing Israeli political party, where they have adopted what's called a decision plan, essentially to legitimize apartheid against the Palestinians living in the West Bank. Their decision plan has three components, three options. Anyone who is willing and able to relinquish the fulfillment of his national aspirations will be able to stay here and live as an individual in the Jewish state. Anyone who is unable or unwilling to relinquish his national aspirations will receive assistance from us to emigrate to one of the Arab countries. That is a polite way of saying that they will expel people who maintain a Palestinian identity. And the third option, according to Berman, is for the Palestinians to continue to resort to violence against the Israeli Defense Forces that will be met with greater force than at present and under more comfortable conditions for the Israelis. So what is being outlined here is a plan to expel some or all Palestinians. And Berman correctly goes back to the controlling document, the Balfour Agreement, almost 100 years ago, where the Jewish participants, the Zionists, tried to draft language that essentially gave them control of the West Bank. But the British, in the final draft, used this language: it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So I think this is important for you to know about, and we will continue to watch the situation in Israel and Palestine. My line is open if you'd like to talk with me today here on our live interactive feed on Facebook. The number to call is 415-455-0102. You can comment on anything in the news. I don't restrict your free speech rights here. And Ben Shapiro, if you want to call in and tell us what you said at Berkeley last night, you go ahead. But I'm very interested in hearing people's comments about Hillary Clinton's book tour, about what you know from her book so far, and about the way she has criticized Bernie Sanders for allegedly attacking her in the political debates and in the political exchanges during the primary last year. You can call me right now at 415-455-0102. Meanwhile, as it appears that the Islamic State is receding in both Syria and Iraq, the Shiite-controlled Baghdad government is ready to settle scores. And yesterday, on the same day that there was a brutal attack in Tiqwar province, where 60 people were killed and 83 wounded at a checkpoint, the parliament in Baghdad basically voted to dismiss the Kurdish leader of Kirkuk. His name is Najmuddin Karim, and this appears to be the way that they are going to push the Kurds, who have been the greatest source of strong fighters to deal with the Islamic State. After all, the Iraqi forces initially melted away, particularly in the fight over Mosul. And so the Kurds get no gratitude from the government whose ass it saved. They saved. And this is similar to the treatment they get in Turkey, and the U.S. remains silent and essentially facilitates the persecution of the Kurds and the marginalization of them as they seek to create their own independent state of Kurdistan, something that I fully support. In Brazil, the embattled President Michel Temer is facing another round of charges related to fraud and corruption. Now they've added charges of obstruction of justice, bribery of people who've already been convicted of criminal behavior. And Brazil continues to descend into a governmental crisis. The economic crisis continues there. And I have friends in Brazil who are really hurting. And it's sad to see that the government there continues to operate in a corrupt manner and maintain control. Or at least they're still in office, I'll put it that way. We're learning more about the Medicare for All bill that Bernie Sanders introduced on Wednesday to the United States Senate. He has, I believe, 16 co-sponsors, which is a very important statement. In the past, when he has promoted single-payer legislation, he's gotten either 1 or 0 co-sponsors in the Senate. Now, one reason, reports the New York Times and its health writer Margaret Sanger Katz, is that the senator from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, succeeded in persuading Bernie to include language for what is essentially a public option. And this, of course, was discussed at the tail end of the negotiations over Obamacare. It was kind of the last-ditch effort by progressives led by John Conyers to avoid just locking in the corporate insurance companies' domination of the health insurance market. And the idea was to put Medicare or something like it onto the state exchanges where people like me buy health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. And I'm not opposed to this, except if it becomes the Plan B, where the kind of centrist, moderate wing of the Democratic Party decides that it's too much work and it could hurt their campaign contributions if they actually cut out the health insurance industry from its predatory role in our health insurance delivery today. The health insurance companies extract something like 30% in operating overhead. Medicare is 5 to 7%. And we're going to hear all the attacks about socialism. It's bullshit. We're going to hear the claim that, government is going to control health care, when in fact, government is going to ensure that people have access because the bill will be paid. Doctors will see patients, even at lower reimbursement levels, because they know the bill will be paid. And there will be some elements of a single-payer law that might dictate what level of services must be provided. And it also might harm the interests of the profits of the pharmaceutical companies by insisting that government negotiate over the bulk purchase of pharmaceuticals. That's not socialism. That is breaking up monopolies and imposing some order in what is a very disorderly, chaotic marketplace today. So I have one more item here. I want to send kudos to our friend Steve Horn. Steve is an independent journalist based in Indianapolis. He's been writing for Demagogues for many years about fracking and other elements of our oil and energy industries. And his work had a tangible impact because he recently co-authored a series of stories about the situation in Standing Rock in North Dakota. And his work provided information that the judge used to move the trial to Fargo instead of conducting it closer to the Standing Rock Reservation, where it's pretty clear that the jury pool is tainted and that people have already made up their minds. Steve has recently joined the Young Turks media network, and he is a rising star in progressive media circles today, so I want to congratulate him for that. So I'm going to tell you a few things here for the next few minutes and give you an opportunity to call in. And if we don't get any calls in the next 5 minutes or so, I'll wrap up the podcast and we'll connect with you at another time. But I really would like to hear your thoughts about Hillary Clinton's book tour, about the elements of the book that have been published or quoted so far, and in particular, the way she characterized Bernie Sanders as attacking her during the campaign last year. Because I thought Bernie failed to attack her. I thought that he was way too gentle. I thought that he voluntarily gave up the most serious line of attack he could have used if he really wanted to harm Hillary Clinton. And that was when, in the first debate, he said, "I'm tired of hearing about your damn emails." And when I hear Hillary Clinton supporters who are on Facebook or other social media who are maintaining the same arrogant posture that they did last year, that Sanders is a nobody, he's not even a Democrat, he doesn't deserve to run against Hillary. Well, in my view, Bernie Sanders did his level best to rescue the Democratic Party from the corporate Clintonism that was a major factor in Donald Trump's anointment as president this past January. Putting aside the vagaries of the election, the voter suppression tactics that were successfully used by the Republicans, and I heard Hillary actually mention that in her softball interview with Rachel Maddow last night. But the Democrats didn't raise any alarms about voter suppression during the election, and they didn't help any of the post-election investigations or challenges to the way the election was conducted. And I believe that Hillary Clinton supporters who take a look at the history of the way she has been pilloried, falsely characterized, blamed for the failings of her husband. I acknowledge that Hillary Clinton has been subject to severe criticism. But not all of that criticism was unfair. Not all of it was sexist. Not all of it was based on people who hate Hillary. And so today, when her supporters talk about how Bernie Sanders attacked her, well, they seem to carve out a special zone where Hillary Clinton is above criticism, where discussion of her failed policies related to Libya and Syria are unfair attacks because she is not a man. There are double standards. There is misogyny. But that's not always the case. And I'm really sorry to see that Hillary Clinton's book tour, which I read one account that it's supposed to run for 4 months, heaven forbid, that this is simply getting people to look backward. It's reopening old wounds. And Sanders has the right attitude that he's trying to pass Medicare for all and not spending a lot of time revisiting what happened in 2016. Well, thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. This podcast will be available shortly at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, and on YouTube as well. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.